it's me. I thought I was supposed to be watching a show. What happened? Just kidding. Good afternoon, everybody. It's Chris here from the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta. And I'm not at the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta. And tonight I am doing this live stream on behalf of the Alberta Prosperity Project, of which I am still involved with. Before we get going, I just want to touch a little bit on that very, very quickly because we have an awesome guest and he's got a lot of really good things to say. I have received some questions over the last little while, specifically at my cafe, about the Alberta Prosperity Project. Where's the Alberta Prosperity Project? What are they doing? Are they still relevant? Have they imploded? Are they doing anything? And I'll answer all those in a. I'll be brief. No, I won't. I'm never brief. I never shut up. So yes, the Alberta Prosperity Project is still around. We're still doing stuff. I still advocate for what they're doing. I'm 100% on board with their purpose in this province of Alberta. And they are still relevant, 100%. As a matter of fact, it is my opinion that the Alberta Prosperity Project is the most relevant thing in Alberta right now, even though we have an election coming up. And the reason I say that is because politics is politics, and politicians do politician thing, and governments change or come and governments go. But when the people stand up and do something together, like what the Alberta Prosperity Project is doing, that makes some serious, lasting changes. So that's why I say, yes, the Alberta Prosperity Project is still relevant. They are still important, and they are doing things, although it's been a little quiet lately due to the election because everybody's busy with that. So you can expect to see more in the coming weeks, and we're going to hit the ground running after election, and it's going to be awesome. So anyway, tonight's webinar is titled 15-Minute Cities and the Just Transition Agenda with our guest, Leighton Grey. Now, Leighton provided a brief biography that I'm going to read for you, and it's not very brief, and he said I could kind of pick and choose what I want to mention in there, but I'm going to tell you all of the stuff that he put in his intro because I didn't know a lot of these things and I found it quite interesting. So ready? Here we go. So Leighton Grey, starting from the very beginning, member of the Carry the Kettle Band in Saskatchewan, raised in Northwest Edmonton community of Kensington, recipient of the Alexander Rutherford Scholarship, 82 to 85, recipient of the ACAC Athletic Scholarship for Hockey, 1985-87, recipient of the Louise McKinney Academic Scholarship to 2% GPA in University Study, 87 to 89, recipient of the William Irvine Essay Prize in Ethics, 1989. Attended the University of Alberta from 1985 to 1992, earning degrees with distinction in arts, English and literature, and law. Awarded the Government of Canada Legal Studies for Aboriginal People Scholarship from 89 to 92. Admitted to the Alberta Bar in 1993, to the Saskatchewan Bar in 2004, and to the BC Bar in 2011. Served on the Board of Governors for Portage College, 2007 to 2011. In 2009, was appointed Queen's Counsel, and at the time was the youngest lawyer in Alberta to receive the title Learned in Law. Founded Lakeland Sports and Learning Academy in 2012. Started his own law practice in northeastern Alberta in 1995 and has since grown into a firm of 12 lawyers in Cold Lake, Edmonton, and Calgary. That firm is now known as Grey Woke Spencer LLP, of which Leighton is the senior managing partner and head of its civil litigation section. He's the Northeast Director for the Alberta Civil Trial Lawyers Association since 1998, recipient of the Culture Alberta Stars of Alberta Volunteer Award, recipient of the 2005 Legal Aid Society Access to Justice Award for career pro bono services to Albertans. It keeps going. Received the Gary J. Big Humanitarian Award from the ACTLA in 2019 for work done on behalf of Indigenous people of Alberta. Senior Fellow for the conservative think tank, the Frontier Centre for Public Policy, publishing many scholarly articles on politics, history, philosophy, religion, and law. Survived a cancel culture attack in 2020, orchestrated by the NDP government and the CBC. Interesting. They're orchestrating something else right now that's coming up, I believe, tomorrow. Maybe we'll touch on that. Anyways, this was based on his conservative views, of course. Majority owner of the Drayton Valley Thunder Junior A Hockey Club, appointed to noble title. This is interesting, and I'm going to ask Leighton to explain this. Appointed to noble title of Count von Falkenstein in December of 2021. Since 2020, has acted as lead counsel in several high-profile constitutional cases, including James Coates and Grace Life Church, Timothy Stevens and his church in Calgary, the lockdown challenge involving Dr. Dina Hinshaw, that we mention often in our live streams, that is set for hearing in February. Many vaccine mandate cases involving Canadian National Railway, Canadian Pacific Railway, Alberta Health Services, the University of Winnipeg, University of Alberta, Mount Royal University, the Salvation Army, BDC, and others. A proud Albertan Canadian conservative and tireless advocate for restoration and rehabilitation of the civil liberties guaranteed to all of us by God and the rule of law, in that order, as enshrined under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In March 2022, Leighton created the Grey Matter podcast, which has now over 100 episodes, of which I've done one with him. The broadcast rights to the show have recently been sold to Canada's largest Christian network, the Miracle Channel. He has a book of 36 essays entitled Leftists, Lies, Laws, and Liberties, and it will be released later this year. So, that was a lot, but here he is, the man with a biography and intro longer than my CV, Mr. Leighton Grey. Thanks, Leighton, for joining us for the 15-minute Cities and Just Transition Agenda chat with the Alberta Prosperity Project.
Well, it's my pleasure, and as you can see, I'm not in my usual studio in the palatial Holiday Inn. Hopefully the Wi-Fi will hold up. I want to start off by wishing everyone a really happy International Transphobia, Homophobia, and Biphobia Day. It was decreed by this internationally, and of course, the Government of Canada was kind enough to endorse this on behalf of all Canadians today. So if you haven't enjoyed that official day today, I hope you've all gone out and done that. Our good friend Josh Alexander, if you know who that is, this is the young guy with the red hat who's out there, protecting children from drag queens. In honor of the auspicious day today, he was arrested by Calgary police because he was on the streets handing out Bibles. And before he could finish handing out Bibles, he was actually accosted and beaten up and assaulted by these friendly, peaceful trans people before the police showed up in cowboy hats to arrest him and cart him off. That's 17-year-old Josh Alexander, high school student. So that's how he spent his international transphobia, homophobia, and I don't even know what biphobia is, Chris. That sounds like grandma's glasses. Biphobia.
Well, yeah, but what exactly? When did we start having days to celebrate being scared or supposedly being scared of things? What's next?
Yeah,
did we get an arachnophobia day?
Well, it's. The truth is, and this is a big part of the problem why Alberta Prosperity Project exists and is so necessary, as you say, is because the government in Ottawa is insane. They're tuned into an insane anti-human ideology, which I'm going to go into more detail tonight about, and they just make these decisions on behalf of us and decide that these are the things that we shall endorse. But whenever you see phobia on the end of a word and it's used by government, it's actually it's an oblique attack, an indirect attack on somebody else. And in this case, it's on those of us who happen to be Christians, or those of us who happen to think that it's not a great idea, or at least it's totally an unproven and really risky idea to have men who think they're women dancing around in skimpy outfits doing sexual dances for children. So that's essentially what it is, whether it has Islamophobia on the end of it, or transphobia, or homophobia. It isn't about fear, it's about persecution of people who aren't subscribing to the correct group think. You can call it woke or anything else, right?
Even worse than that is somebody like me. I get lumped in with the transphobia whole thing. I'm not scared of trans people. I'm not scared of gay people or bi people or any of those people. I have friends who are in those categories. I have friends who do drag competitions, and I'm not scared of any of them. I certainly don't think that drag performers and trans people are conflated all of the time these days. They're two separate things. It's a different issue. I'm not scared of any of it. What I am scared of is society feeling like it's okay to bring in sexualized activities to be shown to our children. It doesn't matter if they're straight or bi or trans or if they're drag performers. If they're doing sexualized activities in front of children, that shouldn't be allowed. I mean,
Hmm.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. I would probably go to an adults only drag show because it would probably be fun, but that doesn't mean,
Hmm.
that I think that should be something that we put in front of children. I've gone to this strip bar in the past as well, but I wouldn't expect strippers to go and read to children in libraries. So this whole idea that those of us that don't agree with that are scared of those folks is completely ludicrous. And like you said, it's nothing more than a tool used by government to try and divide us so that people like Josh get beat up by these groups who
Hmm.
have been convinced that people hate them simply
Hmm.
because they're a Christian.
Right.
It's sick.
Yeah, and bringing this back to our discussion in the APP and the election more broadly, um, heavy support for things like Drag Queen Story Hour is part of the NDP platform. It's part of the
And why?
anti-human flourishing.
Why
Well,
would why would that be part of their platform? Government is supposed to regulate and legislate, not
right.
tell us how to, you know, interact with each other.
Great question. Well, the answer actually ties into the topic of my discussion tonight, but the short answer, Chris, is very simple. It's about control. We are about freedom. Prosperity is, as I say, as people have heard me say many times, and when I have appeared and have talked about prosperity, it is synonymous with freedom. When you're under the control of someone else, someone else's thumb, there can be no prosperity. And so, really, what we're talking about here, and it's a very clear choice in Alberta, and I hope people understand this. It's between prosperity and freedom, and control and human misery.
Could
And
it be
and
could it be that we're so busy arguing with each other over whether or not women have penises that we're
mhm.
neglecting to pay attention to the bad and horrible things the government's doing?
Sure, but it's all part of one, right? The what these people want to do is they want to wipe away all of the traditions, all of the culture that we think is important, for example, as Albertans, that is part of Alberta, the Alberta Prosperity Project. They want to wipe all that away, and they have to wipe it all away in order to replace it with something else. And that something else includes things like 15-minute cities, for example.
A 15-minute city. That sounds wonderful though, Leighton. Wouldn't
Does
you
it?
just love to live in a city where everything was within 15 minutes and you didn't have to own a car and you could just walk to get everything you need? Wouldn't that be great?
Well, if you could choose to live that way, yes, it would be. The problem is, what about people who can't live that way because for various reasons, because their work is more than 15 minutes away, or where they shop is more than 15 minutes away, or the schools where their kids go to are more than 15 minutes away. If people want to live in a 15-minute radius of their homes, I think that's wonderful, and they should have that choice. What we're really talking about is the removal of choice. And that's really what the 15-minute city is about. And I'm going to explain more about that in my talk here tonight so
It
that hopefully
sounds
people understand.
it sounds like it'd be very difficult to do that. I mean, the only
It
way they
is.
could make us stay within 15 minutes is if they had some sort of surveillance that could tell when we're out of our
Hmm.
zone and then issue us tickets automatically through
Right.
some, great big centralized computer software like what China has. I mean, that software doesn't exist. Those
Yeah.
things don't exist, do they?
Well, we see the thing, we're carrying around the little things in our pockets. And we
Bingo.
have we take them with us in our cars, and our cars have onboard computers now, unless you're riding, as you're riding around like Chris in a 1974 Vega, you know, uh,
Close.
our cars can do
Torino.
it. Chris, we have in Edmonton, they're actually building the curbs for the 15-minute cities. They're pouring the cement for them. They've done it. It's happening. So if you live in
And
Edmonton, folks, you're getting 15-minute cities.
the surveillance that we've been getting over the last 10, 15 years for our safety and for our convenience already has the capability to do the things that need to be done to make the 15-minute cities not just a matter of convenience, but a matter of what would be not a choice, right? So the
Right.
cameras, just so the folks that are watching know, the cameras in your city that you see on every single street corner, usually there's 6 because they get every angle at every intersection. Those cameras with a simple software upgrade can read license plates and automatically issue tickets. They can read your face. In China, they actually they monitor their citizens, and if they do something like litter or spit, those cameras, the software sees that, and it automatically deducts points off these folks' social credit score. And in the 15-minute city thing, I was in Europe, and while I was there, there was some buzz about a area in England called Oxfordshire. They were implementing the 15-minute zones because of climate change, and it talked about how no, it's fine. You can still travel around. You just have to get a permit to leave your zone. And if you just leave your zone without getting a permit, then you just get a fine. But you still have a choice. But it can go further than that, can it? Especially considering that we're talking about getting rid of all internal combustion engine cars and only going with electric cars.
Right.
They can be shut off,
Right.
just like a digital ID.
Right. So that's what it's about, and that's what I want to talk about tonight is, why the 15-minute city? And so I've actually written something for my book. It's called 15 Minutes to Tyranny. And I'm going to explain why, and people should really think of the 15-minute city as the boots on the ground, the implementation of the crazy, mixed up, anti-human flourishing ideas that are flooding into our country from the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, right? The whole 2030 agenda that we talk about a lot. What the 15-minute city does is, if you can control human beings in terms of what spaces they occupy, and if you control their access to resources, you've gone a long way to controlling human beings. I mean, most wars have been fought over territory, resources, or religion. Well, you can see what they're doing to religion. Just ask Josh Alexander. They're wiping that out too. But if they can control where we can move, and if they can control what resources we have access to, they've pretty much enslaved us. And so that's really the subject of my talk tonight.
And they also prevent us from doing one of the most important things in society, and that's gathering, right? If we can only gather with folks that are in a 15-minute radius of where we live, that leaves out a lot of folks with different wants, needs, opinions, ideas, and our collective idea pool is limited to this 15-minute zone, and that's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And on what you said there about fighting wars over this stuff, that can happen because if you're confused, you lose. And
I think it will happen, Chris. I think that's where we're headed.
Wow.
I mean, you can see this. You can see this is what Black Lives Matters and Antifa are doing. I mean, we saw some of the fistfights. No offense, folks, in Edmonton. Some of the fistfights after the Oilers lost. That you're starting to see. Edmonton and Calgary are becoming, like the blue cities in the United States, because they're being governed in the same way. And when people are miserable, they get angry and they become violent. And
Vancouver
are set
burns
against each
Vancouver
other.
down whether they win or lose.
Great example. Oh yeah, great example. And actually, I was just at an event recently with Dr. Daniel Nagase, who was raised in Vancouver, and he goes back there to Hastings and where he grew up, and he can't even recognize it. It's not even his city anymore. Vancouver is becoming Canada's San Francisco.
Yeah. It's very frustrating because you and I, we can see where these things are going, right? I mean, and you got a lot more gray matter than I do, but I'm just a dumb roughneck from Alberta who came out here for oil money, and I can see where these things are going just from my very limited knowledge of history, and it really surprises me how many people they don't see any of the warning signs, and we're seeing stuff happen like. Some of the things that we're seeing, neighbors calling the cops on their neighbors for having too many people over, these are serious red flags that people should be paying attention to. And they're not.
That's Nazi stuff. It's funny you say that because I was just talking today with a good friend of mine. His name is Dr. Alex Pavlenko. And he is a neurodentist in Edmonton. He's a brilliant man. This is a guy who came to Canada, emigrated to Canada 25 years ago from the Ukraine, grew up really under the shadow of the Soviet bloc, came to Canada not even being able to speak English. And imagine, folks, taught himself to read and speak English, worked his way all the way through up to become a dental specialist, built a very successful practice in Northeast Edmonton. His two sons now have gone to university. They are dentists. And now he is watching not only his country and his family's home country of Ukraine, it's war torn and people are dying over there, and he's doing a lot to help them. Here he's witnessing in Canada the very same thing that he saw growing up, that he left everything behind, everyone he knew to escape. Just he and his wife came to Canada, and now he's watching the same movie unfold here in Canada. He escaped tyranny to come to Canada and watch the whole thing unfold. And he said the very thing you just said, Chris. He's seen this movie before. He knows what's happening in Canada. Just imagine how heartbreaking it is for someone like that. You're just out of the frying pan into the fire. And the last 25 years spent, educating himself and building a business. And, we're in danger. And folks, I don't want to overstate this, but we're in danger of losing it all the things that we love and enjoy. There's a big choice coming up on May 29th. And if we're going to get to that referendum on independence, we're not going to get it with Rachel Notley in office. So this May 29th is just so huge for every single Albertan who loves freedom and prosperity.
Leighton, I got to say, what freedoms have we lost? We live in a free country. Those things can't happen here in Canada. How do you figure that you have the knowledge or the education to speak to these matters? You don't know anything about the law. What freedoms have we lost? Have you heard those things before?
Yes, I have.
I hear them all the time.
Sadly,
and when people say it to me, it's hard for me to defend because, I don't have the resume that you do. But this has been your entire life, your entire adult life.
Yeah.
You have spent engaged in law and watching these things happen. And so you're saying, and the sum of your experiences are telling you that these red flags are real.
Oh, totally. Well, ask Josh Alexander. Got arrested today. 17-year-old kid got arrested today for handing out Bibles. Talk to Tamara Leach. Look at you, Chris. You went to jail. You went to jail because you wouldn't shut down your restaurant, because you put on, drive-in movies at your restaurant because you wanted to encourage people who were devastated, who were living under oppressive tyranny. Talk to Pastor Coates. Spent 42 days at the remand center. Timothy Stevens. All these people. So, oops, did I lose you there?
Hey, Leighton, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry about that. My Wi-Fi must have glitched out here. Sorry about that.
I think we also lost Chris, guys. So, Leighton, if you wanted to just, go and present your information here, and I'm sure Chris will join us in any minute here.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
So, folks, this is something that I wrote recently for a book of essays that I'm going to be releasing. It's called Leftist Lies, Laws, and Liberties. And this particular one is called 15 Minutes to Tyranny. It talks about the concept of the 15-minute city, which is something that is puzzling to many people. They don't really understand what it means, or why is it a problem? And so this little essay I'm going to present hopefully will leave you with a better, more clear understanding of what the 15-minute city is all about and why it is such a dangerous concept that we really need to be resisting very fiercely. Okay, so everywhere we look, we're told what to think, what to say, what to do, what to watch, even what to buy. We are enslaved as never before in this country of Canada. And more than half of us want to cede or give away what freedoms we still have in the name of security, to actually have the government protect and care for us. That's a very common sentiment as I go about this province talking to people. So, as Chris mentioned, what does it mean to be enslaved? Essentially, it means that we surrender our freedom to choose, and with it, any responsibility for the consequences flowing from exercise of our God-given free will. That's God-given free will, folks, not government-granted free will. So at the core of freedom is independent thought. To think independently, we must ignore the mass media, even the ones we follow and agree with. We must fiercely be self-reliant, but also respect each other's independence. Nothing is more refreshing to me than meeting another free-thinking mind like Chris, whose beliefs arise from independent thought and actual concern for our fellow humans. Such ideation is free of partisan politics or ideology, but is intrinsically conservative. And it is conservatives, folks, not progressives like the NDP, who think deeply about choice consequences, personal sovereignty, and prosperity. So leftist progressives like the NDP are really incapable of thinking in this way. The utopia or perfect world for progressives is global tyranny under a world government built upon the ruins of nation states like Canada and the United States, and the ruins of human liberty. Now, the best living example of this new world order is North Korea. The people there are not forced to support Kim Jong-un. In fact, this is a common misconception. They instead worship him because they long ago bartered their freedom of thought and human rights for the promised security of roughly 2,000 calories per day in noodles and vegetables. Imagine that. Trading your freedom to think for yourself and your human rights for 2,000 calories per day. So when the God Kim speaks there, it is silent acquiescence to each syllable, and not just for fear of open dissent. Within a totalitarian state, most people want to agree. We're starting to see that here in Canada. And this is what is so puzzling and horrifying. Did you know that every April 15th, the day of the sun, which is the anniversary of the birth of North Korea's founder and eternal president Kim Il-sung, massive crowds gather. And they're not just bussed in or gathered from nearby apartment blocks. They worship Kim Il-sung and his heirs, not because they are afraid to think freely, but because they have lost the ability to think for themselves. And this is precisely what the Trudeau Liberals and the Notley NDP want for Canada: total control over our very thoughts. There was a woman named Hannah Arendt who wrote a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism. And this book is the definitive work on the subject and is an essential component of any study of 20th century political history. Arendt begins with the rise of anti-Semitism, that's hatred of Jews, in Central and Western Europe in the 1800s, and continues with an examination of European colonial imperialism from 1884 until the outbreak of World War I. And in her book, she explores the institution and operations of totalitarian movements. And she focuses on two genuine forms of totalitarian government of her time that people talk about a lot. And these are Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, two regimes that are responsible for the killing, the murdering of hundreds of millions of human beings. Arendt, she recognizes that these regimes were really two sides of the same coin rather than opposing philosophies of the political right and left. And so from this vantage point, she discusses the evolution of classes into masses, the role of propaganda in dealing with the free world, and the weaponization of terror, and the nature of isolation and loneliness as preconditions for total domination. So think of isolation and loneliness in the context of COVID-19, folks. Arendt is then able to explain the precise sort of person who is prepared to choose enslavement under a despot, under a Trudeau or a Singh or a Notley, over the responsibility for individual freedom and the natural consequences of your own decisions and corresponding actions. Here's a quotation from her book. She says the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists. Distinction between fact and fiction no longer exists. What about the idea that that a man can choose to be a woman and is actually a woman? What about trans men or women? Is that ignoring a distinction between fact and fiction? How about the prime minister, our prime minister, who's by any logical definition an authoritarian leader? How about him going over to Korea and delivering a speech yesterday on the rise of authoritarianism? How about that? How about that losing the distinction between fact and fiction? So these threads are laid bare by Arendt and are woven into a complex tapestry in another book. And this is one I'd strongly recommend people read.
What's the book that you just referenced called?
That book is called Arendt's book is called The Origins of Totalitarianism. You'll find it anywhere on Amazon. You can get the audio book. There might even be a version that you can listen to for free on YouTube.
Maybe if Walter can just post up a link that would be people. And
there's another book that's been talked about a lot if people are familiar with the work of Dr. Robert Malone. Dr. Robert Malone is the guy who got in trouble about a year and a half ago on the Joe Rogan show for saying that we were under this mass psychosis. Well, Dr. Malone was actually on my podcast, and he explained that he got that idea from another book, which is written by a German guy named Matthias Desmet. It's Desmet. And so Matthias Desmet kind of picks up the thread where Hannah Arendt left off. And he brings this concept of totalitarianism into the 20th century, sort of modernizes it. And he wrote a very controversial recent book, for which he's taken a lot of heat publicly. And it is called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. So according to Desmet, who is an absolute genius, folks, we bear witness to loneliness, free-floating anxiety, and fear, giving way to censorship, which we have in this country now, and too much of it, loss of privacy, and surrendered freedoms. And he says it's all spurred by a singular, focused crisis narrative that forbids dissident views and relies on destructive groupthink. So totalitarian.
This is the last 3 years.
Yes, and this is why I really urge people to read this book. I had to read it three times to really get a total sense of what he's talking about. But he says that totalitarianism is not a coincidence and does not form in a vacuum, as you say, Chris. It's contextual. It was a plandemic. So it arises from a collective psychosis that has followed a predictable script throughout history, and its formation gains strength and speed with each generation. So in other words, we're more susceptible now to totalitarianism than the German people were in the 1930s because of technology and the speed of information. So from the Nazis to the Stalinists in Russia, as technology advances, government and mass media and other mechanized forces, they use fear and loneliness and isolation to demoralize populations and exert control. And this persuades large groups of people to act against their own interests, surrendering freedoms, wearing masks, social distancing, always reporting their neighbors to the government. And this always is with destructive results. Desmet is a clinical psychologist by trade, just like Dr. Jordan Peterson, and he deconstructs the societal conditions allowing this collective psychosis to take hold. And so by looking at our current global situation and identifying the phenomenon of mass formation, which is a type of collective hypnosis, not unlike what has occurred in North Korea that I described, where they actually worship their leader. Desmet clearly illustrates how close we are now to surrendering fully to totalitarianism in the West. Go ahead.
Leighton, some people are commenting, and specifically, her name is Judy. Judy is asking, obviously she knows what you're talking about is true, and I know as well. And what she's asking is, How do we convince people of this? Like, her kids think that she's crazy because of the the rabbit hole she ended up going down with the vaccines. So how do we convince those who are completely oblivious to these facts that this is happening? And so what do you think? How do we do that?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, and but I think where what we've got to do is we have to understand that, and this is part of the focus of my talk and of the work of people like Matthias Desmet. What's happening right now isn't just happening overnight. There's an old saying, Mark Twain once wrote, that a man goes bankrupt for slowly, but then all at once, right? So what happens is, the idea is that what's happening right now isn't just happening. It feels like it is because we're sort of coming to the end of a long process. And it's going to take a while, and I think it's going to take generations, at least a generation or two, to change this. But our friend Judy has the right idea, and she's in a perfect position to make a change. And that is, we've got to stop looking at the tops of the trees. My opinion is that we've got to stop looking to a Pierre Poilievre or even a Danielle Smith or someone like that who's going to come in and have a political change. Even a Donald Trump is not going to be able to change all this. We've got to stop staring at the tops of the trees. We've got to look down at the roots. And that's really what the APP is all about.
Not just government.
That's it. Yeah, and this is what the APP is all about. And fundamentally, this is why it's so important, is it's a grassroots movement. It's looking at what can Chris Scott, what can Leighton Grey, what can Judy do within our own spheres of influence, right? Who are the people we can talk to? Who can we reach? What can we do? And what part of this psychology, this mass hypnosis, is to convince us that we are powerless and we're ineffectual and we're weak. And the truth is, alone. That's a lie. That's a lie. We all have power, but we have power together. Many people working together is what's going to make the difference. And so what I'm saying to people like Judy is, get involved with your school board, get involved in your church, get involved with your kids and what they're doing. Pay attention to what they're watching. Are they on TikTok? Are they, what are they watching? What are they reading? Everybody has a sphere of influence. Some of us are fortunate and we have a broader reach than others. And this is why I'm doing the podcast. But well, what the hell is this lawyer doing a podcast? I'm trying to reach people. I'm trying to get this information out there. And I can't reach everybody, but every single person that I can reach, that can make a difference. The same thing with Chris. This is why, he's doing what he's doing. He has been on this mission for the past 3 years. He went to jail for it. So the key is, try to have influence within your sphere and try to, as far as possible, propagate the right ideas, right? The correct ideas. The other thing you can do, Judy, is May 29th, convince as many people as you possibly can who are eligible to do so to vote, because a very serious blow is going to be struck in favor of the World Economic Forum and the people who want all this terrible stuff if Rachel Notley takes over as premier of this province. So
that was a great answer. I have a little bit more of a pessimistic view. Maybe not pessimistic. I like to think of myself as a realist. So, Judy, there are times when we go through things like this, and this has happened countless times all across history, where one group of people can see the truth and they know what's coming. Another group of people, they just cannot be convinced, and you can't make them change their mind. The best thing we can do is what Leighton said: try to make some influences within our spheres. Reach as many people as we can, and lead by example. We have to be good examples for those that we're trying to reach. We can't be calling them sheep and asleep and calling them down because they don't see the world the same way as we do. All we can do is lead by example, set a good example, and hope that our leadership will encourage them to come with us. But the reality is, many won't, and they will go down this path, and there will be suffering, and people will die. And the other thing that we have to be able to do, and I learned this somewhat the hard way, is we have to be able to focus on the things that we can change, that we have some control over, and we have to be able to turn away from the bad things that are happening and focus on ourselves and our families. Because if we spend all of our time worrying about all the people that we can't reach, we're going to go mad and we're going to get depressed, and we end up in a really, really dark place. So we have to come to the point where we can accept that we can't help or change. We can't help everyone. We can't change everything. So we have to be okay with that. And I know it's not the answer that a lot of people are looking for. People want to, they want a magic wand or a magic catchphrase that's going to instantly turn people around, but it doesn't exist. And so then it becomes our responsibility to prepare for that so that we can continue to be good examples and not become dark, hateful people.
So another crucial aspect of this enslavement I'm talking about is that it's meant to be perpetual. We cannot be captivated only momentarily. Rather, we have to be controlled constantly. So those who are woke refuse to think in terms other than race, class, and sex. And so they think only in these terms, and they insist that everyone else does. And in this way, the progressives are willing, they're obsessive thralls, slaves. Woke ideology offers them, and this is its attraction. People wonder, why are people woke? Well, this is why. The woke ideology offers people a socially accepted, safe way of thinking. So once an individual becomes woke, in other words, that they fully support privileging certain intersectional victim groups over white heterosexual males, then they can think no other way, and by definition are fully captured. So I'm going to mention another book that I strongly recommend. It's called The Diversity Delusion. It's by an American author named Heather McDonald. Again, she's just brilliant. She's written another great book called The War on Cops, by the way, which explains why people want to defund the police. Anyway, Heather McDonald argues that the West is in crisis from the university to the workplace. She says toxic ideas first spread by higher education have undermined humanistic values, fueled intolerance, and widened divisions in our larger culture. So our great authors like Chaucer and Shakespeare and Milton are all considered oppressive and imperialistic. Western history and culture are terrifying tales of tyranny. Professors who correct grammar or spelling, or employers who hire based upon merit, are branded as racist and sexist. Students emerge into the working world believing themselves defined by their skin color, their gender, and their sexual preference, and that oppression based upon these traits is their lived experience, their own truth. Speech that challenges these orthodoxies is silenced by brute force, just like what happened to Josh Alexander today in Calgary. So McDonald argues that the root of the problem is belief in this systemic racism and sexism, which metastasizes, which is like a cancer that drives this diversity bureaucracy in society and academia and media. And so these diversity commissars, the fact checkers on Facebook, people like that, they denounce meritocratic standards, ones that are based upon achievement and effort and hard work, as discriminatory. And they enforce hiring quotas, and they teach students and adults alike to cast themselves as perpetual victims. This is why we have presidents of universities getting called out for pretending to be Indigenous people. Why would somebody want to pretend to be, a discriminated against group? Well, because it's actually an advantage group. From the Me Too mania that conflates flirtations with criminal actions, to implicit bias and diversity compliance training that sees racism in every interaction. Some of you might have had to take these mandatory diversity courses. I know I did, just to continue as a member of the Law Society. McDonald argues that we are creating a society of narrowed minds primed for grievance, and as such are enthralled. And hence we have International Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia Day. So this can only be opposed. This can only be opposed through a renaissance or a rebirth of classically liberal, open-minded, free inquiry and expression, by which everyone can discover a shared humanity that is based in objective reality, not your truth or my truth, but the truth. So in place of government control, freedom implies self-control, right? Food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and medical care are necessities, and we must pay for them and choose what we think we need out of what we can both earn and afford. Common sense, right? Obviously, different levels of earnings will offer different standards of living, and government must not step in to seek to equalize them. Once government begins to provide for necessities, the incentive to work, and to work hard especially, is totally lost. Society as a whole suffers from the resulting stagnation, inflation, and shortages that we are now experiencing. Not only will the inspiration to work be lost, but rational choices regarding capital allocation and spending become misguided. People buy lottery tickets instead of groceries. Many billions of dollars have already been appropriated for green energy or proxy wars, and many hundreds of billions more will be squandered through foolhardy initiatives or outright graft and theft. History shows that when we are free to allocate our own money, we are much more thrifty, much more wise, just as we are more attentive to maintaining our own houses or other property. So freedom is the basis of human flourishing. But millions of Canadians seem eager to cash in their liberty for censorship, a false sense of security, and paltry handouts from a centrally planned economy. Increasingly, we are told what to believe, what to say, what to do, and we face fines or even imprisonment for daring to defy state diktats. The consequences for uttering what the left considers hate speech are very real. In many cases, this involves loss of employment and ostracism from society. Anybody who's been kicked off Facebook or Twitter for a while knows what this is like, let alone getting fired from a job because you wouldn't take the vax. Yet so-called hate speech might simply mean a statement that there are fewer male engineers than male ones, which is currently a 1-to-6 ratio, by the way, or a denial that Indian residential schools were genocidal death camps. These statements are factual, not hateful, but the left considers them improper and even criminal. So essentially, freedom means the right to decide for yourself. Canada has become an enslaved society in which via media, schools, and government, we are subjected to relentless propaganda. We can extricate ourselves, we can free ourselves from this control by imposing a blackout on woke media and government propaganda. You can choose to do that. But we have to be prepared to walk alone, to pray and to meditate, to read the best books, including the good book, which I highly recommend, and to tune out television and social media, and especially rampant government propaganda. It's with discipline and self-sufficiency that it remains possible to live a relatively free existence, although that is changing. Since we are now judged, as Chris pointed out, we are now beginning to be judged based upon our use of pronouns and willingness to affirm woke fantasies of race, gay, and transgendered privilege. There may be no end before millions of Canadians are imprisoned for our refusal to accept progressive lies like what the ones the NDP are spinning. All that smoke down in Calgary, folks, is coming from Rachel Notley. At that point, even for those who attempt to maintain personal sovereignty, freedom will have lost most of its meaning, and only a scant few will survive to know the meaning of freedom. One of the ways in which globalist governments seek to limit our freedom is through reformation of how we organize ourselves into communities. So this is getting into boots on the ground. Why the 15-minute cities? An emerging argument against single-family zoning is that separating housing from other uses forces people to drive to shops, work, and other destinations. So these woke urban planners, they want to redesign neighborhoods so that people must walk to most of these destinations, thereby reducing our CO2 footprint.
Must.
They even have a name for it.
He said
right.
Must walk, not may. Must.
That's it. And they even have a name for this. This is the 15-minute city, meaning that everyone can reach all of their primary destinations within a 15-minute walking radius. Now, that sounds good on the face of it. Sounds rational. But once you start to look deeper, not so much. Edmonton recently announced that it will pursue neighborhood development plans aimed at creating a community of communities, or small towns in our big city where residents can access.
A documentary on that.
Yeah.
It was called The Hunger Games.
Yes, that's it. So residents can access everything they need within a short distance from home. But the idea is not one of passive development. It would involve city development plans, zoning, bike lanes, multi-use paths, etc., reflecting the desire to have modestly self-sufficient enclaves within cities and green-friendly transport options between parts of the city. And folks, they're already pouring the concrete for the curbs to carve up Edmonton into these 15-minute zones. I know you didn't vote for this, the Edmontonians, but this is what you're getting. So where
this isn't policy brought forth by Edmontonians, Leighton. This is policy that came from external organizations that have no accountability.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Chris, and that's a great segue. So that begs the question: where does this 15-minute city come from? Well, it owes its origins to a guy named Carlos Moreno, who sounds like a Mamba musician or something, but actually he's a Colombian urbanist and professor at Pantheon-Sorbonne University. So ostensibly, apparently, the idea is meant as an alternative to continued urban sprawl, which strains infrastructure from roads to sewers to schools and necessitates a car to get around the city. It is also linked to urban proposals for building better public transit and reducing dependency upon cars as the main mode of transit for city dwellers. And this idea, and this won't surprise you folks, the idea accelerated during the COVID-19 pandemic, when our lives shrank and cities experimented with new ways of moving people around, including locking us in our homes. For example, a paper published by Moreno and several other authors notes the increased use of bicycles for transit in Berlin, New York, Beijing, and Paris, which led to calls for more permanent cycling infrastructure in those cities. Now, this 15-minute city concept thus far has only been seriously attempted in Paris, France. They have a leftist mayor there named Anne Hidalgo, and she's been the mayor there for nearly a decade, and she made transforming Paris into a 15-minute city a key platform commitment during the 2020 city elections. And this is where Edmonton's Mayor Sohi, where he got the idea when he ran in 2021. Do as the French do, they say. During the pandemic, Paris created a series of corona pistes, or bike lanes, and Hidalgo vowed to make them permanent during the pandemic. She also told Parisians that they need to get over the idea. This is a quote. They need to get over the idea that they continue to get around the city via automobile. She says, "We must forget the crossing of Paris east to west by car. The city needs to evolve." Pardon my bad French accent. But European cities are already, if you've ever been over there, I know Chris was just there, I'll probably agree with this. European cities are already quite walkable, particularly compared to North American ones. This is because their construction largely predates the invention of the automobile or motorways.
Yeah.
So in the UK, the cities of Canterbury and Oxford, where Chris was, are both experimenting with the idea, but are being met with considerable public resistance. More on this later. From the perspective of urban planners, there are many steps to take that would reshape cities. So Edmonton Mayor Sohi, in his campaign documents from the 2021 election, which was essentially are on the city's website now, and they were just on the screen, pointed to several of these. The first would be changes to zoning rules restricting businesses within a community. A 15-minute city would require zoning and development changes such as better walking and cycling infrastructure to facilitate these 15-minute journeys. Now, according to a US study, the Americans make only 12% of their daily trips within 15 minutes of their homes. That means 88% of where they're going, where they need to go in a day, is outside of a 15-minute zone. So that's according to data. Yeah.
So I've noticed some comments about people saying stuff about taking up arms and people need to hang and this sort of thing. So I want to remind everyone that's watching this that the Alberta Prosperity Project has a clear path to prosperity. We have a solution for this. There is no need to take up arms and do those sorts of things, and we don't advocate for that at all. There are other groups that, I'm sure you could find a group that's what they think that has to be done, but that's not what we're about. We've never been about that. We will never be about that. We are about peaceful solutions, legal, lawful solutions that don't leave anybody behind and don't result in any kind of violence. And once Leighton gets through what he's talking about, we're going to tie this into the solution that we can and we will achieve if we work together. So please put that out of your minds. This isn't a discussion where we're talking about storming the Capitol. On the contrary, all we're talking about here is using the current laws to become the most prosperous and free either province or country on the planet. And we'll get back to that later. So just cool your jets, everyone.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chris. And I'm glad that you brought that up. And I'm actually grateful that people are making those comments, because I think it's good that people are angry. I think we suppress anger too much in our society. I think it's a mistake to do that. I think anger is good, but as Chris said, it's the way that you channel it. So let's say that people get out into the streets and start rioting and burning things and breaking things. Is that going to encourage or discourage governments from imposing 15-minute cities? Well, I think it's going to be a license to them. In fact, I think that's part of the plan. They want people to get angry and violent. They want them to start smashing things and breaking things and rioting, because that's going to be an excuse, so that they can use the violent force of the state, which is justified, in order to suppress freedom and lock people in their homes, just like they did during COVID. And folks, they will do it again if we riot. If you don't believe me, I mean, the Freedom Convoy was not even a riot. It was a peaceful protest, and they used force to quell that. What do you think they would do if we got out in the streets and started smashing and burning things? So as Chris says, we've got to be smart. We have to be wise as serpents, as Christ said. And in the way that we channel our anger, we can do it effectively. We can do it wisely. We can you think of like a laser, right? We can focus that light so that it just burns through a diamond. We can do that if we're wise, and if we. But it's good. I like the anger. I like the indignation. If you are getting up angry by what you're hearing from me, that means I'm reaching you. So I'm glad for that. So anyway, let's get back to this. So go ahead, Chris.
One more thing. Sorry. For the folks that are annoyed by the laughy face on this post, whoever is doing that, they're here all the time. And I know who they are. And I could ban them from the page, but I don't. And I do it for one reason, because they're listening. So whatever, laugh all you want, put up some likes, put up some loves, help us get this live stream up into people's priority on the news feeds, and just ignore it.
Yeah, I'm no advocate for censorship. So people want to come on here and disagree or mock me, they're free to do that. But as I was saying, according to a U.S. study, Americans make only about 12% of their daily trips within 15 minutes of their homes. And this is according to a very large study collected from 40 million mobile devices. So that's a lot. Okay, that's a pretty big study, pretty good sampling of the population. 40 million, that's more people than there are in Canada right now. But such data is more limited in Canada. But if you think of Ottawa is a sprawling city if you've ever been there. Whereas in Vancouver, 75% of residents live within about a 15-minute walk to a grocery store, and about 99% are within a 15-minute bike ride, according to a recent Simon Fraser University study. So supporters of the 15-minute city naturally include the World Economic Forum, the WEF. They say that it would be more convenient if we did not need to drive across town to pick up an item or get your kids from daycare. They point to all sorts of metrics, that it would be a more social city with community nodes and parks. It would also be a more active city and thus healthier. And of course, most importantly, with those lower carbon emissions, right? We're protecting ourselves from the sun monster. But in a paper published recently, urban analyst Alain Berthaud has demolished this leftist fantasy of the benefits of 15-minute cities. He notes that Mayor Hidalgo made the 15-minute city part of her 2020 re-election campaign and continues to promote it while in office. But Berthaud looks at the city to see, he actually got into the city, deep into it, to see what it would take to actually achieve this objective. right? So like everything else the World Economic Forum talks about, there's the fantasy and then there's the reality. So Berthoud begins by calculating that a person can reach about 740 acres in a 15-minute walk on city streets in Paris. Based upon the average population of the municipality of Paris, as opposed to the urban area, there's an average of 77,000 people living in any given 740-acre zone. And within that, there are an average of 59 bakeries and 197 food stores. He says there are also enough elementary schools to be within 15 minutes of every part of the city. So what do all these numbers mean? Well, what they mean is that there's no need to create a 50-minute city because Paris effectively already is one. So why then does anyone drive in Paris? Berthoud notes that Paris has 1.6 jobs for every worker, with more than 51,000 jobs within a 15-minute walk of typical residents. But many dwellers drive to work, and more than half take at least 30 minutes to arrive at their chosen destination. They're choosing that. Only 12% take 15 minutes or less to get to work. So even though Paris is a 15-minute city, about 88% of the people are not living according to this 15-minute city diktat, which is just like the United States. The problem this presents is that although there may be 51,000 jobs within walking distance of one's home, that does not mean that your particular job is within that 15-minute proximity. Commuting comprises less than 20% of trips in the United States, and it is probably similar in France. It's probably worse in rural Alberta, for example. This means that when people decide where to live, their work location is not necessarily a controlling or even a contributing factor. Then the same logic no doubt applies to other possible destinations. For example, there might be 197 food stores within 50 minutes of where we live, if you live in a city, big city. But they may also be expensive. And so we would prefer to save money by shopping at a supermarket that is several miles away. So what Berthoud rightly fears is that when cities achieve the dream or nightmare of putting everything within 15 minutes of each resident, but we continue to drive anyway, cities will impose draconian regulations to penalize driving. Now, before COVID, this would have sounded nutty, right? But we've seen this movie before, folks. This would be the sequel, right? In fact, on one view of the matter, the COVID-19 lockdowns were a preparation for this. So Mayor Hidalgo of Paris, for example, plans to make it illegal to drive through central Paris. And many of you have probably seen movies, either aerial pictures of France or downtown Paris with all the cars going around in the big traffic circle. Well, you won't be able to do that anymore because France has also forbidden large booksellers from selling at a discount so as to preserve the viability of small bookshops within walking distance of everyone's homes. Now, this is totally against freedom and also capitalism, which tends to work in favor of consumers. This is totalitarianism brought down to the constituent community level, restricting the choices that we as consumers can make about where we can go, where we can shop, and how we get there. It presumes the right of government to restrict our individual freedoms for the sake of securing what is deemed to be the best for the broader community. Remember, 15 days to flatten the curve, right? Remember, get the vax to save your neighbor. Okay, this is all just repackaged stuff, folks. Everything old is new again in advertising. So here again is the great trade-off, surrendering freedom for security that only the state, the government, can provide. So the 15-minute policy would seem to be much more difficult to implement in North American cities. Other than Manhattan, no other city in America has Parisian-level densities of more than 66,000 people per square mile. Urban American densities average more like 2,400 per square mile in 2010. And I think in Canadian cities it would be roughly similar, which is not nearly dense enough to put all the services we need within 15 minutes walking or cycling distance. So even if half of the so here's the rub. Even if half
to the same spot,
that's right. But that's it. So that's why we have to rezone everything, right? We restructure everything. Here's the rub. Even if half of the supermarkets, for example, were perfectly distributed across the urban landscape in, say, Calgary, Edmonton, more than 50% of the population would still not be within a quarter hour of one of them. So this is one of the reasons why urban planners have such a mania for increasing urban densities. Because no matter how hard we try, we are not going to double urban densities, especially when doing so, we'll fail to eliminate driving anyway. So as urban economist Edward Glaser has aptly stated, this entire concept destroys opportunity by restricting freedom. He says this: the 50-minute city should be recognized. And folks, if you forget everything else I said tonight, I hope this one sticks to your brain like lint on Velcro. The 50-minute city should be recognized as a dead end, which should stop cities from fulfilling their true role as engines of opportunity. In other words, being in a 50-minute city defeats the whole purpose of being in a city. And there are other problems with the concept, one of which is ghettoization, such that towns within cities would limit interactions between various communities, producing slums. We see this particularly in the United States, but in some of our bigger cities, we're starting to see this now. We talked about Vancouver, Chris and I were saying, and it's in Calgary too. I saw some pictures of Calgary that are really, really shocking. Another is the risk that it hollows out parts of the city. The downtown core of many cities are quite dependent upon commuters for their vibrancy. So as the pandemic really illustrated, a whole host of problems arise when people are not visiting a part of a town. See Portland, Oregon. And those of you who are from Edmonton or remember Edmonton before the ice district, I mean, that part of Edmonton had become a real ghetto. And when you go there now, you see how vibrant that ice district has become. It's become a hub. And when you start to ghetto, when you start to prevent people from congregating in these areas, then what you do is you ghettoize parts of the city. So some critiques, however, go beyond the merely practical problems with the 50-minute city. And this is where we start to envision mandates prohibiting residents from leaving their neighborhood. This sounds crazy.
Well, the government doesn't impose mandates, Leighton.
Oh, of course. But this sounds a little bit crazy. But I saw a video of folks in Oxfordshire in England who were stopping people on the road to check to see whether they were in the correct zones. So this is already happening, folks. And in Edmonton, critics have expressed justifiable concern that such a proposal would bar people from traveling to certain parts of the city, and that they could be forced to spend 90% of their lives within their own district, all the while being closely monitored and, as Chris said, socially graded for carbon emissions. So there can be little doubt that measures such as fines and fees, which we saw during COVID, fines and fees for traveling between zones are designed to make it cost prohibitive to drive and to leave your neighborhood. For example, as I mentioned, in Oxford in the UK, there are fines for driving cars between neighborhood zones. And the Paris driving ban has gone into effect this year. Dr. Jordan Peterson, who's actually going to be in Alberta, I hope if you can get out and see him. I'm going to see him in Red Deer on the 22nd. He's going to be appearing in Edmonton on the 24th, and I believe in Calgary on the 25th. He said this. He recently tweeted that while the notion of a walkable city is lovely, it is a perversion if taken too far. This is what Dr. Peterson says. People can say what they like about Dr. Peterson, but he's always interesting, and I tend to pay attention when he writes stuff like this. He says the idea that idiot, tyrannical bureaucrats can decide by fiat, that is without any public input, where you're allowed to drive is perhaps the worst imaginable perversion of that idea. I love Peterson. He's great. Anyway, in Alberta, the furor over 50-minute cities has become so great that politicians in small towns where the Trudeau Liberals are actively promoting the concept have had to come out and say that towns like Olds, a population of 9,000 people, will not be broken up into districts with a transit scheme like Paris. Folks, I spoke recently in Cochrane, and I met a man named Ron Voss. He's just an incredible guy. He's a retired university professor, and he has a great blog called Dog with a Bone. Check that out, Dog with a Bone. And he's gone around the horn, deep into this 50-minute city idea. And I used a lot of his ideas in the preparation of this paper. And folks, you would be amazed. Nearly every municipality and town in Alberta has signed on to the World Economic Forum and is adopting these 50-minute cities. Cochrane, the city of Cochrane is doing it. My own city of Cold Lake is doing it. Many of these municipalities, you have no idea the extent to which this is being adopted without your permission or understanding. And seriously, a town the size of Olds needs to be rezoned. 9,000 people. I mean, come on, folks. This has nothing to do with rezoning or 15-minute cities. It has to do with controlling populations. So the best argument to utterly reject the entire concept of the 50-minute city is that its main support emanates from that hothouse of evil anti-humanity known as the World Economic Forum. So here's the truth about it, folks. In a December 2022 paper entitled "How Europe Can Reshape Its Cities to Boost Vibrancy, Resilience, and Climate Action," the real purpose of the 50-minute city is revealed. So this is from an actual paper, folks. If you don't believe me, and I hope you do, but go on to the World Economic Forum website and look this up. This is a direct quotation from what's on there. And by the way, when you visit that website, you're going to notice that almost everything on there has become the same policy that the Liberal government is imposing on us. You can put a template over it. It fits perfectly. Anyway, this is what it says in the World Economic Forum's website. Efficient space use enables 15-minute cities. Improving urban forms is one of Europe's most powerful levers to mitigate the climate crisis. Europe has committed to reaching unprecedented goals, including a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and its leadership by example is more urgent than ever. Yet another climate conference with weak agreements. So these deranged authors, it's up on the screen now, you can see it. Thanks, Walter. These deranged authors then go on to state that efficient and balanced spatial redesigns enable shorter commutes and the use of active transport, significantly reducing the 23% of Europe's emissions caused by urban mobility of its residents. The reduced dependency on parking and roads also frees up land for green spaces, which can alleviate extreme summer temperatures by 2.5 to 6 degrees Celsius, reducing heat island effects of dark sealed surfaces such as roads, common in unbalanced cities, they call it, folks. They even claim that this will, get this, they claim that this will, quote, literally save lives. Laughable. Now, as usual,
they always say that, literally save lives. We're literally saving lives.
See, folks, if you didn't believe me, it's right on the screen, the direct quotation. As usual, there is no scientific support for any of this climate scare bugaboo, any more than there is data showing a connection between human CO2 emissions and climate change. But that will not stop the global elites from using the sun monster to confine us to our homes, restrict us to our zones, take away our cars, and fine us or even imprison us for non-compliance. We will own nothing, we will no longer be free, but we will be saving the planet. That is Agenda 2030 in a nutshell, and that is the NDP agenda in a nutshell, folks. For those of you who are playing this game at home, who are hopefully going to vote on May 29th, that is their agenda, okay? Meanwhile, Justin Trudeau and his ilk will continue to fly to Davos each year on private jets for the annual World Economic Forum conference, at which the globalist elites will devise new ways to enslave and depopulate our allegedly dying planet.
While spending $300,000 on escorts.
Yeah, allegedly. And here's an answer to Judy's question. Only the individual and collective exercise of our God-given free will can extricate or free us from being enslaved by such godless tyranny. And I'm going to close here with a quotation from Voltaire, who was a famous French writer, Enlightenment writer. And he said, well, he said it in French, but this is a translation. He says, "It is difficult to free fools from the chains they revere." So that's my presentation on 15-minute cities, folks. Thank you very much for listening. And I would be pleased to answer any questions or anything that Chris wants to pitch at me or that people want to present in the chat. Thanks for listening.
there's always times where I want to interrupt you and ask something or make a comment, but then I'm like, oh no, what he's saying next is interesting. I want to hear more. So I never say anything. But I'm going to get Walter to throw something up on the screen that I sent him via text message while you're talking.
Sure.
I got a kick out of this. Guess who's advertising on my live streams?
Wow.
Gil McGowan and the Alberta Federation of Labor is advertising anti-Danielle Smith propaganda on my Facebook page. But you know what's even funnier?
Isn't Gil McGowan the guy who really likes to give everybody the Trudeau salute?
Yeah, he's the guy that I actually shook his hand and I told him I was going to dissect his speech and make him look like an idiot when I saw him at the Ledge Grounds.
Well,
but the funny part about this is he's actually paying me for this.
I
get paid for him putting that ad on the page.
Turnabout is fair play, and good on you for accepting his money, Chris.
Well, I don't have a choice. Facebook picks it, but I just got a kick out of it.
Leftist money is still green, right? But what's interesting about Gil McGowan? He's with the Alberta Federation of Labor. Since Madame Notley is always throwing rocks at Danielle's windows, we should say that in fact Mr. McGowan is part of the same organization to which Madame Notley's husband belongs. And that he was in a very high-ranking, high-paying position within that organization, and they were actually using money from that organization to actually campaign against the premier of the province in favor of Madame Notley. And although the Notley gang would never admit wrongdoing, and although this person did not have the integrity to resign as they should have, I noted that they did step away from the position, which is about as far as as much as we can get from these leftist people who have no.
So Lou Arab is his name, folks. For those of you that are wondering, his name is Lou Arab. Now I want to point something else out.
Since we're naming names, I
want people to know who these folks are.
I was going high, you're going low. Okay.
All you need to do to find this out is go and look and who sits on the provincial board of the NDP. They're all union bosses.
Yeah. And but could there be a more obvious conflict of interest though, Chris?
Pardon me?
Yeah. I mean, I know you're not a lawyer, but I mean, I think anybody can see. I think Stevie Wonder could see that is a conflict of interest.
Oh, absolutely. Now it gets worse, and actually it gets better, folks. So these unions are supposed to advocate for labor, right? That's the whole purpose of a union. But what they're doing is they're upping your union dues, and they're using those union dues to support the NDP. And then in turn, the union bosses are getting high-paying positions on the NDP provincial board of directors. Like, if this is literal mafia crap and people are buying into it. And then they're taking the union lists, allegedly, and taking orange signs and plunking them in people's yards who are members of unions. And worse than that, they're sending out emails saying in not so many words, if you don't vote NDP, you won't get your raise. So the corruption, this whole thing just stinks to high heaven. So when I saw the AFL, Mr. Gil McGowan, advertising anti-Danielle Smith propaganda lies on my Facebook page, the irony is just astounding there. Look at that. Is Danielle Smith a threat? Albertans have too much to lose. Do you know a threat when you see one? Yeah, I do. It's lying friggin' commies like Gil McGowan and the provincial board of the NDP who sit as union bosses and take people's money in order to pursue their political desires.
You know what's interesting to me, Chris, about the people who say that they're afraid of Danielle Smith. Well, we don't know what kind of premier Danielle Smith is going to be. We have a small sampling size, but we sure as heck know what kind of a premier Rachel Notley's going to be.
Oh,
right. I mean, we've seen that movie. And anybody who's been to downtown Calgary lately, sees the devastation that she wrought. The debt, the high unemployment, and really, folks, the decrepit state of our healthcare system, which was revealed during the COVID-19 pandemic, and which is still manifested now. is all Notley's doing. Okay, that was all Notley's doing. That's the reason why things were so bad. It was Notley's people. Dina Hinshaw was a Notley appointment. Verna Yu, who is the head of the AHS, thankfully long gone, fired. These were her people in place, and you know, they're the ones who really, and if you want to understand how bad COVID would have been with Rachel Notley at the helm, go back and look at her tweets. Go look at her Facebook page. It
was horrendous.
We know that. Listen, we know what Rachel Notley is, and anybody who thinks that is not going to be just you know, terror 2.0 is really kidding themselves. I have a hard time understanding the degree of level of popularity of the Orange Party in this province. It really baffles me.
Me as well. During Rachel Notley's reign of terror, they were renting out office space in Calgary for free because the property management companies could no longer afford to pay for the utilities and the taxes on the buildings.
Yeah,
that's how bad it got in a city where the energy industry occupied 80% or something like that of office space. They were giving it away for free. That's how bad it was.
And you know, they're waiting to come back, Chris. They're waiting to come back. They are. But they're not going to come back if Notley is in power. There's no way.
No, absolutely not. And you know what? I don't even know where my place would be in Alberta, because if somebody shows up at my door with a needle, there's going to be a problem. You know, I'm not a violent man, but don't try and kill me, please. Thank you. And these are the kind of things they want to do. Like, as a conservative, my views are different than liberals, and I don't even call myself a conservative anymore, although I lean more to the right. I don't really care what other people want to do with their lives. I wish them the best. I hope they're fine. But what I realized throughout the last few years, and specifically becoming in the spotlight, this 15 minutes of fame that's like the 15 days to flatten the curve, just perpetual. Not that I'm famous, but I mean, I'm still in the spotlight, so to speak, is that the people that are on the far left, they don't just disagree with me. They actually want me dead. They've said so much. They were upset when I got hit by the train and I didn't die. When Carrie got hit by the train, they said, "Oh man, we're so disappointed. We thought there was going to be a couple more dead free-dumbers."
When did you get hit by a train?
What, you didn't know that?
No.
Oh yeah, back in
January. Are we talking like the crazy train at karaoke with
live train? Like, I was getting pushed down railroad tracks and I could reach out and touch the train with my left hand.
Oh my gosh, that
must
had
a bunch of broken ribs.
Wow.
It was terrifying, yeah. But it opened my eyes to a lot of things. Number one, I realized how dark of a place I had got into and how everything was affecting me, because from the moment I realized I was going to get hit by a train and wondered how the death was going to happen, like how long is it going to be? Am I going to get run over? Am I going to get knocked out? What's going to happen? During that short little time period of like a few milliseconds, the weird feeling that I had was relief. I was relieved when I realized I was going to die. And that's like, I'm not suicidal at all, but when you're exhausted and you're watching these things unfold and you're hearing people's stories of pain and suffering all the time, I mean, it's exhausting. And maybe if you accept that something's happening to you that you can't control and you're just relieved that it's out of your hands, it makes you think about what you're doing in your life.
Yeah.
And then watching the people's response afterwards, there was an outpouring of support and, concern for both Carrie and I. But there was a few people, the internet trolls that constantly attack things on our Facebook page, that said that they wished we had died. And there's a lot of people like that. That side, they do not believe in human values. They don't believe in the sanctity of life. As a matter of fact, if they think that you're using too much CO2 or too much energy, or you're not buying into their narrative, they would be just as happy if you were dead so that they could be unchallenged.
Well,
that's the difference between the sides.
Yeah, Klaus Schwab's book, The Great Reset, also he has another one called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. It calls for the elimination of 7/8 of the world's population. And
elimination,
Bill Gates says,
the death.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, and Bill Gates has said repeatedly, unabashedly, that he thinks the maximum population the Earth should have is 500,000. Now, I don't know how a computer peddler who's a college dropout understands something that is really immeasurable, and that is, what is the optimum level of people we can have on this planet. What I do know is this planet has been along for a really, really long time, and it's demonstrated a proven track record of being able to regulate its own population, which is why we don't have T-Rexes on Main Street.
Mm-hmm. And adapt to, there's always a response. When humans impact the planet responds in a specific manner. If we need more energy, we advance technology, we use more energy, we emit more CO2, the planet greens. And the green stuff on the planet eats the CO2 and provides us food that we so desperately need. Like there's what do you call it? A cause and effect. And it's certainly not what Bill Gates thinks, where, yes, here we go.
Yeah. The planet is a lot smarter than us, right? But here's something I want to share with people. So this is from, so recently, Dr. Tam, who is a self-appointed expert in everything, but is not even a very good doctor, it appears, based upon her abysmal track record with COVID. She published a 105-page manifesto on climate change. This is called Mobilizing Public Health Action on Climate Change in Canada. So you see how they did that, folks? They turned climate change into a health issue. And so this is what she says. She says, according to Tam, without swift and urgent action, climate change poses catastrophic risks for present and future generations and the livability of the planet. Remember what the World Economic said? Remember what the WEF said? That we have to do this to save lives? Okay. So this report that she just filed claims that cities like New York and Shanghai, neither of which are in Canada, by the way, may be underwater within our lifetimes. Well, this kind of tweaked me because I'm a bit of a historian, Chris, as you know. And so I went back through my my old annals, and I found a 1932 headline. And for those of you keeping score at home, 1932 is about 91 years ago. And this is from the Jefferson City Post-Tribune in Missouri. This is a headline from the 2nd of May, 1932. Melting glaciers would flood Earth's big cities. Just raise the average temperature of the Earth 2 or 3 degrees, and you could bid goodbye to all the big cities on Earth. Glaciers will melt and oceans will rise. One could still be dry above the 155th floor level in cities with skyscrapers, but all about would be the bounding waves. London, New York, Paris, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Washington, and yes, Shanghai would all be gone. So you tell me what this is all about. Is this truth? And here it gets even better. She says, look, not only do we have to do something to protect ourselves from the sun monster, she says the severity of climate change's effect upon health is influenced by structural systems of oppression, such as colonization, racism, ableism, and heteronormativity. So, citing examples from the American Journal of Public Health with titles like "We Need Environmental Health Justice Research and Action for LGBTQ plus people" and "Queering Environmental Justice," unequal environmental health burden. Yeah, this is the governor of Canada, folks.
Fired.
Yes, this is why Alberta has to get away from these people. She says Tam laments the climate adaptation efforts have not focused sufficiently, not enough, upon the experiences of the LGBTQ group. But hey, she expands upon her incredible intellectual genius to lecture us about the law, arguing that concepts of justice are also important for climate action. So she proceeds to argue for Indigenous environmental justice. Heaven only knows what that is, and I'm an Indigenous lawyer, which requires a concurrent focus on Indigenous knowledge systems, legal orders, governance, and concepts of justice. This focus upon justice also includes prioritizing youth indoctrination so that our kids all become crazed climate activists like gruesome Greta Thunberg. So you can see, folks, this climate change is not just about it as an economic policy. This is the key. This is the big kahuna for governments. The sun monster, it's perfect because as long as our planet is alive, we'll have the sun. And if the sun, which is the life-giving energy source for our entire solar system, is actually the source of all of our problems, that this goes on perpetually, and climate, under this sort of umbrella of climate action, it governs everything. And so governments are going to have to be in every aspect of our lives. There's a famous quotation I'll just read to you from H.L. Mencken, who's a brilliant American economist. He wrote a great book called Our Enemy the State, which you should read. It's on our reading list on our podcast. So he said this in the 1930s. This is going back like 90 years. He wrote this. He said the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of which are imaginary. You see what it is? The government of Canada is going to create the emergency, the fake emergency. They're going to create the problem which only they can solve. We saw this with COVID. We're seeing this with climate, and we're seeing this with racism and all this stuff. And meanwhile, everything they do just makes it worse and worse and worse. We keep surrendering more and more freedom to them. They get more and more control. And with it, what do they do to us? They enslave us, right?
And this is why I say the APP, the Alberta Prosperity Project, is the most relevant thing in Alberta, because we're teaching people and educating them that they are the solution, not the government. But Leighton, I just had a very depressing thought. Have you ever seen Demolition Man?
Yes, great movie.
And,
great
you've
movie.
Seen it?
Yeah, I'm very sad to say that Sly Stallone has gone kind of woke, which is kind of sad to me. But anyway.
He has, yeah. Do you remember the scene with the virtual reality lovemaking?
Yes.
So I think that's going to happen. I think the government's going to say, you need to, no more fluid transfer, no more heavy breathing, because you're expending all of this CO2, and you can only use your VR headset from your computer. I think it's coming. It's going to happen.
Well, look at Meta. That's what I mean, and Mark Zuckerberg.
It is happening.
He's been very upfront about this. He wants people to live in a virtual reality.
Yes.
And the way they market that is that it's superior to actual reality. Of course, it isn't. It never could be, because it's unnatural.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I used to play computer games when I had time to think about playing computer games. I don't anymore. I mean, I try, but I never get into it. Anyway, I use a platform called Steam, where you download games and you can save them in your library or whatever. And I'm going through the suggested games, and a virtual reality, I don't know how to describe it, but it was an adult-oriented game in which you just went and did stuff with people or people's whatever. And they're advertising like physical attachments that you plug into your computer so that you can live this Hugh Hefner life without ever leaving your home. And they're encouraging this to combat climate change.
Yeah.
It's here.
Because we are a pestilence. The whole theory comes down to that we are a pestilence upon the planet. We are the enemies of the planet. In fact, we're an important part of the planet. Did you know, Chris, people don't realize this, we have more green spaces in the world today than we ever have in recorded history.
Okay, of course we do.
You know, and the whole climate catastrophe, not only is CO2 not bad for the planet. If you read, for example, Dr. Patrick Moore's books, this is a brilliant Canadian scientist who was one of the founders of Greenpeace. He broke away from them when they got all nutty, and they started lying to people. But he says actually CO2 is the life-giving the part of our atmosphere. It drives everything. It feeds plants. Without this fundamental chemical reaction called photosynthesis, there would be no life on this planet. And in fact, he even in one of his books, he posits the theory that if we had not discovered fossil fuels and started burning them, so that there was more CO2 in the atmosphere, that right now we would be in an ice age. The Earth was cooling around the time of 1800, and then about 200 years ago or so, we discovered fossil fuels, coal, the like, and started burning them and releasing the CO2 in the atmosphere. And so Dr. Patrick Moore, who is one of the most brilliant minds on Earth in terms of actually understanding climate science, says that we are actually saving the planet by burning fossil fuels.
Yep. Anybody that believes in net zero should want to burn more oil and gas, because that was organic matter at one point that received its energy from CO2 that was at one time in the atmosphere, and now it's trapped underground, and if we don't release it, the plants can't eat it again. So you could consider that net zero. Now, people are asking us, Leighton, we've identified the problems, we've talked about these things. What's the solution? What are we going to do about this? And why would we be talking about this on the Alberta Prosperity Project page?
Well, we're talking about Alberta Prosperity Project page because this is part of Alberta Prosperity's project. Its mandate, its goal is to raise awareness and to educate the public. That's a huge part of it. In fact, on one view of the matter, the APP is a think tank. And that's why people like Dr. Modry, and Jeff Rath and myself and Tanner Naday, people like that are part of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. You wouldn't need people like us to bring forth ideas like this. And the reason why we're talking about this today is because the 50-minute city is one of the boots on the ground methods by which the federal government is implementing World Economic Forum policies in your own communities. Okay, and this is most people understand the concept of the Trojan horse, right? So municipalities are under provincial jurisdiction, right? But the federal government is coming to municipalities and offering them money in exchange for implementing 15-minute cities. They're going to places like Olds with a population of 9,000 people and saying, here, small town ravaged by COVID, here's some taxpayer money that we're going to pay you if you participate in this federal government initiative to become a 15-minute city. Well, as soon as those towns get on the federal government dole, who's controlling them then? So this answers the question, why are we talking about 15-minute cities? Because it's a sovereignty issue, okay? And we're up against this federal government that wants to control every single aspect of our lives. And Alberta Prosperity Project is about prosperity, human flourishing, and freedom. It's about restoring and rehabilitating our sovereignty and our cherished institutions. And so we're talking about the 15-minute city in this context because this is happening right now. If you're hearing me right now, this is probably happening in your own community. People on your town council and your city council, they're already implementing this stuff and you don't even know about it. So what can you do about it? Guess what? You have a voice. You can go before your town council and your city council anytime at their next meeting. You can get a group together and go there and protest. Say, are you implementing a 15-minute city? You can get the minutes of their meetings and go through. You can go and pull their policies. And this is how we do it, folks. This is boots on the ground. This is how you exercise your right to democracy and your freedom. But you've got to get up out of your chairs. You got to get off, to stop watching podcasts and actually get out there.
Don't stop watching the podcast. Right? Keep watching.
Yeah. Never mind. Keep watching podcasts. But keep watching mine and Chris's show. But you got to get off your duff and get out in the community and do something. And you can actually, and you can make the biggest difference. Getting back to that great question that Judy asked, which is kind of runs sort of a theme that's run through the whole show. This is what you can really do. You can make the biggest difference closest to your front door, right? You can make a difference in your kids' school, in your community athletic association and supporting local business, right? and going to your town council, your town councilman, and your MLAs and say, what is this 15-minute city? I don't want this. I don't want this World Economic Forum stuff. Get this out of here. But in the bigger picture,
Take
folks,
it to the streets.
That's it. The bigger picture in the APP, we've got to have this referendum.
Whoa.
This is,
Leighton, you said this is a federal government problem. So why don't we just elect good MPs and just have them tell the federal government that Alberta doesn't want to do this?
Well, my good friend Michael Wagner, who's spoken at APP events many times, has a better answer for that. The short version of what he says is that, folks, it's a loaded game, and it's not that's never going to change. If we're going to govern Alberta for Albertans, we've got to do it ourselves. And we can't expect that, someone like Pierre Poilievre is going to change it. I happen to think, no offense to Mr. Poilievre, I think he's a very intelligent guy, and he really wants to be prime minister. But I see the difference between Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau as a difference between Coke and Pepsi.
And not only that, but unfortunately, folks, Alberta does not have the voice it needs to have in federal politics and the federal government and parliament to stop any of these things. The entirety of Western Canada could vote Conservative. We'd vote Conservative, and I don't even know what Conservative federal government means now. We could all vote, let's PPC or Maverick, more freedom-minded federal parties, and it would not make a lick of difference because the East and Central Canada have more votes and more voice than we will ever have. Mm-hmm. And those folks, the 2 million bureaucrats that live in that area, they love this stuff because it benefits them tremendously. And they're not going to stop it because Alberta doesn't want it. The current government, Danielle Smith, they're trying to take a stand with the Alberta Sovereignty Act saying, no, federal government, you stay in your lane, we'll stay in ours according to the Constitution. But unfortunately, the Constitution is also skewed to benefit Central and Eastern Canada. So really, while I'm glad that that step is being taken, I see it not as a solution, but I see it more as a necessity to show people that we cannot do the things we need to do under the current structure of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And we need that referendum so that either we change the Constitution so that Alberta is benefited and has a better deal, or we declare our independence and withdraw from a confederation that wants to go down an anti-human path where you own nothing and be happy. Because I really don't believe Albertans want that.
Yeah. Folks, if the people who are listening to this want maybe a more detailed answer to this, I'm going to put a shameless plug in here for the June 17th get-together, APP get-together in Bowden. Dr. Modry is going to be there, and this guy is off the charts brilliant, and he's great. And also Michael Wagner, who's an author, has written many books on the topic that we were just discussing, and he can give a much more cogent answer to the question than I could. So I hope that, and some other real great lights there I see. Well, they got some guy named Chris Scott there. What's he going to say? Corey Morgan, who I haven't met yet, but I really admire his work. Very, very courageous, outspoken journalist, and I tend to agree with most of the stuff that he writes. And of course, my good friend Jeffrey Rath is going to be there, and Jeffrey Rath and Chris Scott are the guys that always get a standing ovation at these things. I'm a little bit bitter about that, but if you've ever been to one of these and you've heard them speak, you'll understand why. They really get people out of their seats. I think I encourage people to come and check this out. I'm going to be there, and look forward to seeing Chris and the other speakers there as well.
You know why I speak at APP events, Leighton? I lived my whole life doing things that I thought were, they were beneficial to me. I wanted to work in the energy industry because it was good money and I liked the work. It's very fulfilling. But I always had this thought in the back of my mind, like, when I'm gone, what have I left? What have I done? Did I contribute? Did I make a difference to absolutely anything? And now I see what's happening in the world and in Alberta and in our communities. And I watched the APP come up from basically nothing, from some people that really wanted to make a difference. And I realized that I'm very passionate about this because I've realized that if we get this information in front of Albertans, into every Albertan, we educate them as with the reason why we need this referendum, how it works and what happens after, what the benefit is. We've done something amazing and important, and it's going to benefit people for decades to come. Like, this isn't just we want to elect a new government thing. This is we want to change the way the world is working in Alberta and take it off of a path to destruction and put it on a path to prosperity. That's huge. And so I'm very, very passionate about this, and I hope that it continues to come through when I'm speaking at their events.
It's a great.
As a matter of fact, besides making burgers, I'm more passionate about this than just about anything else.
Yeah, and Chris, the reasons for and the urgency really for sovereignty for Alberta are even greater than they were when a year or so ago when I got involved with APP. Just to give you an example, we talk about 50-minute cities. The evil policies that are being implemented by this federal government just have no end. They've got a bill coming in that I believe it's Bill C-36. And get this, folks, it's going to make French the primary language all the way across Canada for every federally regulated government agency. It's going to make French the primary language. Can you imagine?
Why?
That's going to cost an absolute fortune. It's going to cost an absolute fortune because it's a concession to Quebec, because Quebec has brought in long ago, they brought in a Bill 101, which made French the primary language in Quebec. And the federal government wants to prevent the Quebec government from continually using the notwithstanding clause. And so the only way to fix that, in their view, of course, this is a federal government, killing a mosquito with a machine gun, is to impose French upon the entire country. Now, understand also, okay, what we're dealing with Justin Trudeau is, as inept as he is, he's been very consistent in one respect, and that is, he said, and you folks can look this up, there's a YouTube video. He says his most terrible but most truthful things in French, and he said in an interview in 2010, before he became the leader of the Liberal Party, that Quebec were the most important people in Canada, that only the prime ministers from Quebec were the only good prime ministers we ever had, and that the country of Canada exists for Quebec. And he's been very, very consistent with that. And because the whole country has been run in the time that he's been there, and arguably throughout the whole history of Canada, has been run for the primary benefit of Quebec. And so, where we're going to have in this country is a proliferation of the French language. It's going to cost an absolute fortune. It's going to cause all kinds of unrest, and it's going to continue the persecution that's being waged by this government against English Canadians, both inside Quebec and throughout the country. And it's going to make cities like Edmonton and Calgary look just like Ottawa, and that is the goal. That is the goal: is to impose their will, to have the same culture, monolithic non-culture, existing all across the country. So they have these things are all in place, and they're coming. They're coming at us just like that train that ran into poor Chris and Carrie. And we got to get off the tracks, and the way to do that is the referendum. And folks, our only chance to get to the referendum, some of you don't like Danielle Smith, or maybe you're on the fence about voting for her. We're not going to get that referendum with Rachel Notley in office. She is going to be a regional governor for the Liberal Singh coalition. That's who she is. That party is not even distinct from the Singh party, which is not distinct from the Liberal Party. It's a uniparty. It's a unistate.
But it does stink.
It does. but Danielle Smith, she is committed publicly to having the referendum, And I think if we get the UCP government, we're going to see some of the policies that APP supports. For example, provincial collection of income tax, which Saskatchewan is already committed to. We're going to see some of the APP policies incorporated by this government. And as Dr. Modry has commented many times, that's a pathway. The Alberta Prosperity Project has Danielle Smith's ear. We're closely connected to them, and she's looking to the APP for a source of policy as a think tank that will find its way into legislation. Remember that the Alberta Sovereignty Act, the Alberta Sovereignty Act, just let me finish this point. The Alberta Sovereignty Act started as an idea that came from a Take Back Alberta think tank. And so that shows how the openness that she has to these ideas that Notley does not. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to be very, very clear here. As a politician would say, let me be perfectly clear. What Leighton just said about the Premier, APP having the Premier's ear, does not mean that the Alberta Prosperity Project is wolf in sheep's clothing UCP.
No, I didn't mean to say that.
That's
we're not a political
what
party.
It means at all. What we're saying is, in order to achieve the goal of this referendum, no matter what anybody thinks, the Alberta Prosperity Project will have to engage with the government of the day. We have to. That's the only way to get this done.
Part of our mandate.
That's
part of our mandate is to create ideas and to create a lobby, a powerful enough lobby to influence government policy,
right,
to make laws that benefit Albertans. Yeah.
And we have done that. It's been successful. So
yes.
a conversation that came up a while ago was, how can we, as the Alberta Prosperity Project, work with the government in order to foster the idea of independence? Now, that question would be asked if it was an NDP government or a UCP government or an Independence Party of Alberta government. That's what the question would be. How do we engage with the government in order to accomplish our goal of independence through prosperity through independence, or getting a referendum so that we can fix things? Right. That doesn't mean that the UCP the APP works for the UCP. It means that as an educational society, we realize that no matter who the government is, we have to work for them. So there are folks out there that still believe the lies that were spread before, that this was nothing more than a tool for the UCP. It's not. I've been with this organization from the very inception. That has never been the case, not even for 1 minute. I've never had that concern. And I mean, for what my word means, that's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But you have to acknowledge that in order to do something as with the magnitude that we're proposing, having a referendum on independence, it will require participation with the government.
Yeah. Well, I don't even have a UCP membership, so I'm not. My focus is on getting the right policies in place, not necessarily advocating for a particular party. But what I meant to say is that we have a very clear choice in Alberta. We have a possibility, we have the prospect of influencing government with some of our ideas, some of our policies. With the UCP government, we have no chance with the Notley gang. The Notley gang are completely oppositional to everything that Alberta Prosperity Project stands for. That doesn't mean that we'll give up if the NDP take office, but that would just make our job, I think, a lot harder. I should mention, Chris, before we forget, you and I are going to be together again, I think physically in Victoria. What would that be like? For the Reclaiming Canada conference in Victoria. Mm-hmm. If people can make it out there, you haven't been to Victoria, it's just gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful parts of Canada. And it's coming up there May 26th to 28th. Chris and I are both going to be there as presenters on stage, live and in person. It's going to be some really, really smart people there. I'm really looking forward to talking with and seeing some familiar faces. And, it needs your support, though. I mean, if you can go there, if you can afford to make a donation just to support the Reclaiming Canada. This is a wonderful organization, very much aligned with the ideas of the Alberta Prosperity Project. really seeking to restore and rehabilitate Canada to its rightful place as the greatest country in the world. There's going to be people from all over Canada are going to be there. Please check it out, and if you can donate and support it, do that too.
Can you scroll down again, Walter, to the schedule there?
Yeah, I'm going to be on 3 different panels. I'm on activism with Chris. I'm in politics, and I'm also in law. So I'm like a triple threat. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's going to be a good time. And I'm someone posted on there, Stouffer says, Alberta boy turned island boy. I'm an island boy turned Alberta boy. I love Vancouver Island. Victoria is one of my favorite places on the planet. I'm originally from Campbell River. Well, I grew up in Kamloops, but I spent my teenage years in Campbell River, which was a wonderful place to spend my teenage years. And apparently, I was born Albertan. I just had to transition to a different province to fulfill my.
Well, there are a lot of great people in BC who are very much, I think, aligned with the APP. I think at one point there might have been a sort of a mission that went out there. I know they went out to Saskatchewan one time. Were you part of that group that went to Saskatchewan, Chris, with Dr. Modry?
I was, yes. Yep.
Yes.
Me and
did they also go
Dennis
to BC at one point? Yeah. Did you guys also go out to BC at one point, or?
No.
I can't recall.
No,
but I know there are a lot of people, especially. Yeah.
We were planning to, but I had sanctions that prevented me from leaving the province of Alberta.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, dangerous. How did Michael Jackson put it? Smooth criminal.
Smooth criminal. Yeah. Apparently, well, I think it's more what Maxime Bernier said when he was arrested. The police said, "Do you have any weapons on you, and or anything dangerous?" And Max said, "Just my words," or something like that.
Yeah, I was his lawyer. I did his bail hearing. He wasn't lying.
Oh, did you? I didn't know that.
He's and ironically, he's now running in a Manitoba by-election, and I think he's got a great shot. He's running in a Manitoba by-election there, and if he gets into Parliament, oh my goodness, there's going to be a cry of freedom all across this country. Could you imagine Mad Max in Parliament? Wow, during question period.
He's not perfect, but I really like the guy. Like, there's a lot of people that, for what they say, they don't like him or they think he's a whatever. But I've had a lot of conversations with him, and he's the real deal. He's a real guy.
He is a really genuine
mistakes,
guy.
Of course, but he means what he says.
Guy. Yeah, I had it as a guest on my podcast, a shameless plug, and spent an hour or so with him. And just a really brilliant guy, very principled. He shares a lot of my own values. I'm not very much aligned with the Conservative Party of Canada, frankly. I think that they are a left of center party. They've been pulled so far to the left by the Liberals and the NDP that really they now occupy the space that the Liberals used to, right?
Yeah.
And we need some balance within our political spectrum. And I think if the PPC could gain a foothold, because they're the only party that really has what I would say traditional conservative values, we need some balance because everything has shifted so far to the left that there's really no balance there. There's no truly conservative voice. When you look closely at the Conservative Party of Canada, at their policies, they're really not much different. It's sort of liberal light. It has been for a long time, and I happen to think that's why they keep losing, and I don't know why they haven't figured that out. But I think that's why they keep losing, and they will continue to lose if
the
they
reason
follow
that
that
happened,
attack.
The reason that the Conservative Party became not conservative is more reason why we need to pursue Alberta independence. The reason the Conservative Party became the Liberal Party in sheep's clothing of Canada is because they were forced to pander to the bureaucracy in Eastern and Central Canada, who are largely leftists, and they knew if they didn't do that they couldn't form government. So they had to somewhat abandon their Western base and focus more on the Eastern leftist base and change their policies to suit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always the way it's going to be. Anyone that makes government in this country has to win the East, at least Ontario or Quebec.
Yes.
And if we're ever going to change that, we have to either have better representation in the West or be our own sovereign nation.
Yeah.
There's no other way.
I don't happen to think that Justin Trudeau will be the leader of the Liberal Party during the next federal election. I think his popularity is so low. I don't think he has the integrity or the courage to risk losing. So I think what he'll do with his popularity so low, I think he'll step aside and he'll sort of exit stage left, and
just walk out of Parliament like he usually does.
He'll leave the party to take the hit, which is, for those of us who are old enough to remember, is exactly what Brian Mulroney did to his party back in 1993. He was so dreadfully unpopular, and he stepped aside and he let the poor Kim Campbell take the full shotgun blast for him. And so she was prime minister for a cup of coffee, and it destroyed her political career, unfortunately, because she was a very talented lady, a very intelligent lady. I probably would have been a really good prime minister. But I predict that's what Justin Trudeau will do, because his popularity is so low right now. I think he's down to 27% of the polling thinks that he should.
Who are these 27%, and what are they smoking?
Hard to say, but that's really low. I mean, for example, Joe Biden's approval rating in the United States is down around 35%, and that's a record low. They haven't had any president that low in public opinion since they started recording it. So 27% is, I mean, sounds like a lot, but it's, I mean, really you're saying 73% or 3/4 of the country think that you do not have the moral authority to govern. And that's pretty bad. It says a lot about the state of our country, actually.
Sniffing children's hair during national press conferences doesn't really get you a lot of popularity.
Yeah,
but
he's very ill. I honestly, it's very hard. I mean, if you want to see how ill he is, go back and even look at the presidential debates he had with Trump in 2020 and listen to him then, and then listen to him now. He can't even string a sentence together. He doesn't even know where he is. In fact, there's a really gut-busting impersonation that President Trump did of Biden recently. He just nailed it. If you go watch it on Twitter, it's from about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Go look that up, folks. It's absolutely gut-busting. I mean, it's sad to see a man. I mean, he's literally dying before our eyes. I'm no doctor, but I mean, I think everybody can see what dementia looks like, and he's really getting into the late stages of it. I really feel sorry for him, but I feel worse. I mean, I think it shows what it demonstrates really, and what is terrifying is that a government like the United States can be run without an active brain, and I think that's equally true of Canada.
But there's a reason why. It's because governments are largely run by the bureaucracy behind them.
Yes,
and Biden's no different.
Very, very true. Very, very true. That's
why people hated Trump, the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why it's a bit of a mistake to focus upon leaders, because in a real sense they're sort of lightning rods for what's really going on. And I think you nailed it, Chris. This bureaucracy, this administrative state, this blob that's running everything, and running everything badly, and not for the benefit of Canadians or Americans or citizens of any country. That's the real problem. That's what we have to get away from. And that's really what APP is all about.
There really is only one way to fix that, and that is foundational law that prevents it in the first place. We don't have that in Canada. We have the opposite, actually.
Yeah.
We have
new Constitution, new Bill of Rights.
Yeah, but those things are open to interpretation by activist judges. And the difference there, and not only that, but in a democracy, you can make law and change law to benefit the bureaucrats, which we see all the time. In the United States, they have that to some degree, but as far as I know, their constitution is rock solid-ish and based upon unchangeable laws that, in our democracy, if we decided that all people who wear Pabst blue ribbon shirts should be incarcerated because they're wearing those shirts, majority rules, I go to jail. In the United States, can't happen because it disagrees. It's contrary to the foundational law that the democracy is built on. And I think we need that here. We need that in Alberta. We need that in Canada. And earlier on, somebody mentioned something about breaking up Canada. And Leighton and I have talked about this at different Alberta Prosperity Project events. The idea that the Alberta Prosperity Project hates Canada and wants to break up Canada is completely false. On the contrary, we have realized that if one province or more doesn't stand up against the tyranny that the federal government is imposing on all the provinces, nobody will. When one province stands up and leads by example, just like one pastor standing up and leading by example, or one restaurant owner, or one gym owner, others stand with them because they want to do what's right. They just think they're alone in thinking that they can change something. So we want to be that province. We want Alberta to be that province that stands up and sets the example for the others and shows them that, no, there is another way. You don't have to go down this own nothing and be happy. You can take all your sovereignty that's guaranteed you under the Constitution, and then you can demand that the federal government stay out of your areas. You can do that as a province. But until one does it, none of the other ones will. So we kind of have a duty to do it.
There's the people who say this about, and I mean no disrespect to the people who say this. I understand why. I mean, I was raised to be a proud Canadian too, but this whole thing sort of reminds me of something in the criminal law that's called battered woman syndrome. Battered woman syndrome is actually a defense that women could advance in a criminal case if they killed their husband, because over a period of time the husband had been so abusive that the wife or the spouse was in constant fear of grievous bodily harm or death. In other words, that they lived in constant fear that their husband was going to kill them. And this becomes a syndrome. And I think what we have in Alberta is battered province syndrome. And the people who want to stay within Canada, I think, are trapped. And people wonder, well, why? They see, for example, women who get abused by their husbands, and why doesn't she leave? Well, it's a syndrome. It's a psychological syndrome. And I think some of the people who want to hold on to some vision of Canada, which no longer exists, which might never have existed, are ignoring the fact that we are just being battered and abused. And if we don't get away from this dangerous abuse of power in Ottawa, it will destroy us. It will destroy our freedom. It'll destroy our province. It'll destroy our children. It'll destroy our grandchildren. And people who are nostalgic for the old Canada need to understand that that this is a situation of survival. If we don't cut loose, if we don't get away from this, we're going to drown with it. And Chris is right. Yep. If there is a hope for Canada to save it, it's Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba as a Western coalition. If there is a hope to change, and I think that hope is faint, actually, even with a Pierre Poilievre-led government, because I think they would behave. It's very unlikely that a conservative government is going to hand back all of the power that the Liberal government has acquired over the last 8 years. Governments don't tend to hand back power peacefully to the populace. That would be an historical anomaly, not the rule. And so, the likelihood that we can restore Canada as the true north, strong and free within the current constitutional structure is exceedingly unlikely. In fact, I don't believe it's possible.
And like I said before, realist, right? I would say if you love Canada, if you love this country, you should be willing to stand up and be counted in those Albertans who demand that the federal government start treating the provinces equally as was intended when this country was formed. If our federal government observed the sovereignty in each of our provinces and allowed us to live the way we were supposed to, we're supposed to be culturally different and distinct in different provinces, and be okay with that. We're supposed to appreciate it and allow each other to chart our own courses, develop our resources, administer healthcare, education, all of those things, but work together on the broader things. If we could return to that, there'd be no problem. But if we don't demand it, how do we expect to get that Canada back? We have to demand it. So if you love Canada, you really should be willing to stand up and be counted in that referendum on independence.
Agreed.
Well,
Mr. Host, where to? Whither and where to? Are we at the end of the show, or are we near the end?
Yeah,
of the
we're
beginning?
we're an hour over, but what's an hour between friends, right?
This turned into a little bit of a bonus episode of the Chris and Carrie show.
There you go. Yeah.
Without Carrie.
Yeah, we're 2 hours and 12 minutes into it, and I got to say, Leighton, the conversations with you are always they're fascinating. I don't fall asleep at all through them. They're very interesting. And you always make me think about things a little bit differently, which you've done this episode. And I'm sure you've done that for the folks watching. So thank you very much. Apparently, the brief biography that you provided was nothing in comparison to having an actual conversation with you. So kudos to you.
Well, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure having this platform to speak with people. And I hope everybody gets out and votes.
If you folks have questions about anything that you heard on tonight's webinar, please reach out to the Alberta Prosperity Project, www.albertaprosperityproject.com. There are links in there where you can send in questions, you can contact people, all those sorts of things. If you haven't already, or if you haven't become a member of the Alberta Prosperity Project, please consider it. Like I say, this is probably the most relevant thing that's happening in Alberta right now. More relevant than politics, even though politics may be more exciting right now. And you really should support it. Get your membership, donate if you can, because believe it or not, these things do cost a pile of money. If you were a member and your membership has lapsed and you've chosen not to renew your membership because you had some concerns about the way things were going, or you're not sure if APP is going to continue or whatever, please take my word for it. And believe me when I say the Alberta Prosperity Project is currently the only viable solution for this province. We are. Because no matter what politicians want to do, the province needs to be educated into why they should support those politics before they will support them. And that's what we want to do. Please get your membership. Renew your membership. Tell your friends. Reach out to your chapter leaders and organize events. Let's hit the ground running right after this election and get back on track and get moving towards a referendum on independence in this province, no matter what government we have. So that's my ask from you all. And I hope you enjoyed the webinar. And thank you, Walter, for working behind the scenes tirelessly to have the cool screen changes and presentations.
They're our technical genius. Oh,
hey, that looks like
shameless plug, Whistle Stop Cafe.
Neptune.
Folks, I've been there. The food is great. Terrific. And Chris probably spat in my food and it was still good.
I would never do that, but I would sweat in it by accident. Just kidding. I don't sweat in your food. We have some really, really good cooks at the Whistle Stop Cafe. We have some awesome staff. Some of them have been there for years. This place, the Whistle Stop Cafe, is much more than a business to me. It's my life now, right? Yeah. Like this place, the Whistle Stop, people drive from all over the province, all over the country to stop there. They'll drive from Ontario to a couple stops they're on their way to the Yukon from Ontario.
Chris, it may be in the process of becoming an historic site in Canada.
It may be. or it may just wither away to nothing and never be significant for anything ever again. I doubt it. But I love this place. I love our food, and so does my staff. And you can see that, and you can taste it when you come and you try it. It's not just a greasy spoon diner like some would have you believe. I mean, look at that picture. That's steamed broccoli, steak Oscar, and some garlic mashed potatoes that we made. You don't expect this stuff from a little diner in the middle of nowhere. You expect food that's good enough to get by, but that's not what we're all about. And not only that,
please don't ever start using those robots like McDonald's is to make
no,
food.
I will not do that. But the other thing that we don't believe in just good enough to get by is
look at that
conversation or political views or anything like that. We don't believe in good enough.
Is that Eggs Benedict, Chris?
Thanks, Walter.
My wife,
thanks for that.
My wife Jennifer loves Eggs Benedict. I got to bring her there. She hasn't been there yet. When I came, I was with my father-in-law, Jack. If you remember, my wife wasn't with me, but I'm looking at that Eggs Benedict right now, and my wife would be all over that. She loves Eggs Benedict. So,
well, you know where we're at, and that's one of our breakfast specialities.
We're going to come through there. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Walter, for putting that up there. I appreciate it. And thank you, folks, for watching. Thank you for supporting the Alberta Prosperity Project. Check out Leighton's podcast. There's a lot of them, but it's way better to binge watch his podcast than it is to binge watch Shameless or something like that, because you're going to learn something from his podcast, and you're going to be brainwashed from TV. So check it out, and keep your stick on the ice, as one of my friends would say.
Nice. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me here. It's been a pleasure as usual. I look forward to seeing you in Victoria.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe you'll get to meet my dad.
Oh, I'd love to. Shake his hand. Okay.
He's very liberal.
That's okay. Try to convince him.
Yeah. All right. Night, folks.
Okay, take care.